Welcome to Matters Financial, Geopolitical from a Frontier, and thank you kindly for stopping by. I understand it's always a busy day, and I appreciate it when you stop by. I took this photograph this morning from my office window at about 6:55 a.m. It's looking from Westlands Museum Hill, where my office is in Nairobi, looking towards the central business district, and I had got quite a furore on social media. Everyone got quite excited about about the photograph. I participated in an interview with Hong Kong TV about the Ebola virus. That link is up on Rich Wrap-Up, so if you care to have a listen. I like this photograph that Kenya Pics tweeted, "Perfect weather in Nairobi." My piece over the weekend covered a number of things. Essentially, my view is that we're in a new normal, a very arrhythmic world. I also touched on President Kagame's words, where he said the markets are never wrong. And I said there was no sharper signal delivered in Washington than those 5 words that President Kagame uttered, and that picking up the signal through the noise of our world in 2014 is no easy thing. This Saturday, I look forward to hosting Dennis McCory, the CEO of On Phone Media, at Mindspeak. Mindspeak, of course, is held at the Intercontinental. We serve breakfast from 9:30. We start at 10, and we end up at 12. And it's a great place to meet out, network, and listen to some very outstanding speakers, of whom Dennis will be one. As I said, 9:30 breakfast. We start at 10. We've had great guests this year: Christine Lagarde, Dr. Naikuni, Charles Ireland, Dr. Richard Sesibera, Munir Ahmed, and Joshua Oigara. My home thoughts, I went to Mantalk at Safaricom yesterday. Joshua Oigara was the guest, and he said many things, and the one thing I liked was set goals which scare you, he said. We finally had the announcement of a Gaza ceasefire, and I think anything that stops the bloodshed is good news. Russian President Vladimir Putin met with the Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko yesterday. I'll put up a photograph of the two of them meeting. Taiwan fighters chase China jets. A week after US incident, Taiwan sent jet fighters to tail 2 Chinese military planes that entered the island's airspace, a week after a close encounter between a US and Chinese jet. We responded immediately, asking them to leave, Taiwan Defense Minister Yan Ming said yesterday in Taipei. Fighter jets were dispatched to warn the Chinese surveillance aircraft, each of which entered Taiwan airspace twice yesterday. And of course, I wrote about this over the weekend. Last week we learned from the Pentagon that the US filed a formal complaint with China about the near miss between a Chinese J-11 fighter jet and a Navy Poseidon P-8 patrol aircraft 135 miles east of Hainan Island. And this was an example of the new level of arrhythmia. I was describing friction, a kind of unsettling ambiguity that we find in front of us. And I said, how are you to navigate these financial markets? And in the old days, these conditions would have created a flight into the dollar. And interestingly, the dollar has been punching higher. If things tip big, the dollar might soar, I said. I typed in arrhythmia into my computer for that weekly article and spat this out. For years, I'd been studying the phenomenon of chaos, of which an arrhythmic heartbeat was a perfect example. And of course, that ties into what I was talking about in the 2nd of December 2013, when I said the pivot to Asia bears its fangs. And I was saying the US probably feels it holds a decisive hard power advantage at this moment. And given that the trajectory is one of gradual erosion of that decisive advantage, leads me to the view that this pivot to Asia has a logic and momentum of its own. Therefore, I see the US being increasingly determined to press its advantage. The Islamic State now resembles the Taliban with oil fields, says Bloomberg. Reign of terror over a large population, ability to self-finance on a staggering scale, The extremist group that beheaded American journalist James Foley resembles the Taliban with oil wells. Controls an area of Iraq and Syria larger than the United Kingdom, may be raising more than $2 million a day in revenue from oil sales, extortion, taxes and smuggling. The Islamic State is probably the wealthiest terrorist group we've ever known. This is Matthew Leavitt, a former US Treasury terrorism and financial intelligence official. They're not as integrated with the international financial system, and therefore not as vulnerable to sanctions, anti-money laundering laws and banking regulations, he said, contrasting that to the late Al-Qaeda chief from a wealthy family enjoyed a network of foreign patrons. Funding sources of Al-Qaeda were able to be squeezed by financial intelligence officers. And saying because the Islamic State makes their money primarily, if not entirely locally, it's much more difficult to squeeze their revenue streams. They control 7 oil fields, 2 refineries, 6 out of 10 oil fields in eastern Syria, selling crude oil at deep discounts. What I found interesting was that initial estimates immediately after the September 11, 2001 attacks put Al-Qaeda's wealth in the region of hundreds of millions of dollars, greatly exaggerated the amount of money at Al-Qaeda's disposal. The 9/11 attacks cost only $1 million, in point of fact. Dr. Davidson, who I follow on Twitter, tweeted more scenes from Riyadh yesterday. Armored security forces rally amidst the rumors. So it's quite a, there's a lot of uncertainty, I think, in the Middle East right now. In the normal places, but also in Saudi Arabia. That's interesting. Fighting has been raging for weeks for control of Tripoli Airport. We know about that. I spoke about that yesterday. I mentioned that I found a certain spookiness about the British accent of hip-hop artist Abdel-Majed, Bary, Jinny, Lyricist Jinn, or Jihadi John. I'll put up a photograph of him and just remind you that he's playing with Jinny and Lyricist Jinn on the idea of the Jinn or Jinn, who are considered supernatural creatures in Islamic mythology. The Quran says that the Jinn are made of a smokeless and scorching fire, but also physical in nature, being able to interfere physically with people and objects and likewise be acted upon. They are usually invisible to humans, but humans do appear clearly to Jinn as they can possess them. Jinn have the power to travel large distances at extreme speeds and are thought to live in remote areas, mountains, seas, trees, and the air in their own communities. Like humans, Jinn will also be judged on the Day of Judgment. My point is that it's quite a sophisticated character that this fellow Bary has created for himself. Point to fight from hip-hop artist to beheader, and just to be alert to what he's playing on. A Jinn can fly over huge distances at extreme speeds. This whole concept. James Foley killing father of murder suspect in jail for 1998 U.S. Embassy attacks. His father is awaiting trial on charges arising from the East Africa U.S. Embassy bombings in 1998 that killed 224 people. That's interesting. The original complaints against Jihadi John's father, was that Mr. Bary's fingerprints had been found at a location from where a fax message was sent to the U.S. authorities claiming responsibility for the embassy bombings. Buthaina Shaban, who's the advisor to President Assad, has now complicated matters further by asserting that Foley was in fact murdered by Islamic State militants a year ago. She said James Foley was first arrested by the Free Syrian Army and he was sold to ISIS. You can check with the UN. James Foley was killed a year ago, not now. They only released the pictures now, but he was killed a year ago. We have definite information. The UN has the information. How interesting. Buthaina Shaban, I'll put up a photograph of her, is a key advisor to President Assad. US apparently is giving Syria intelligence on jihadists. They've begun reconnaissance flights over Syria, sharing intelligence about jihadist deployments with Damascus through Iraqi and Russian channels. The cooperation has already begun, and the United States is giving Damascus information via Baghdad and Moscow, one source close to the issue said on condition of anonymity. And then I was taken back to an article in First Look. From the new Hitler, this is Assad, back to US partner in less than a year is an impressive feat for Assad. August 18, 2011, President Obama officially demanded that Syrian President Assad resign for the sake of his own people, saying he was no longer fit to lead after imprisoning, torturing and slaughtering his own people during a crackdown on pro-reform protesters. October 24, 2012, most of the arms shipped at the behest of Saudi Arabia, this is a report of the New York Times, and Qatar to supply Syrian rebel groups fighting the government of Assad are going to hardline Islamic jihadists. This is the genesis of ISIS, in point of fact. Barack Obama, August 31st, 2013, after careful deliberation, I have decided that the United States should take military action against Syrian regime targets. We are the United States of America. We cannot and must not turn a blind eye to what happened in Damascus. And you know, I think that was essentially a false flag by Erdogan. That's the gas attack. And then today, the New York Times is saying President Obama has authorized surveillance flights over Syria, a precursor to potential airstrikes there. But a mounting concern for the White House is how to target the Sunni extremists without helping Bashar al-Assad. The flights are a significant step toward direct American military action in Syria, an intervention that could alter the battlefield in the nation's 3-year civil war. And then, of course, on Monday, Syria warned the White House that it needed to coordinate airstrikes against ISIS, or it would view them as a breach of its sovereignty and an act of aggression, but essentially signaling its readiness to work with the US in a coordinated campaign against the militants. So interesting, and clearly, he has tremendous sticking power, that's for sure. I'll put up a photograph of President Assad and Mrs. Assad. And then remind you of what Chuck Hagel said, oh, this is beyond anything that we've seen, so we must prepare for everything. And in that article, it concludes, enemies exist, of course, but boogeymen don't. Anyone who tells you otherwise is just trying to sell you something. I took part in another interview about Ebola with CNC News. Do have a look at that. That's on Rich Wrap-Ups. We're referencing Ebola, which I previously described as non-linear and exponential. And then I put up that link again for Monkey Meat and the Ebola outbreak in Liberia by Vice, fascinating documentary. And I'll post a picture of people gathering around a man suspected of dying from the Ebola virus in one of the main streets on the outskirts of the city centre of Monrovia, Liberia, August 26th. Ebola has the upper hand, says a US official. MSF say they can only offer limited help in Congo Ebola outbreak. Congo declared an Ebola outbreak on Sunday, announced plans to quarantine the area. Congo's 7th outbreak since the deadly hemorrhagic fever was discovered in 1976 in the same isolated northwestern jungle province of Equateur. MSF said that 4 of its samples had tested positive for the virus without specifying whether these were in addition to 2 cases already confirmed by the government at the weekend. Usually we would be able to mobilize specialist hemorrhagic fever teams, but we're currently responding to a massive epidemic in West Africa. This is limiting our capacity to respond to the epidemic in Equateur province. MSF, this is interesting, said the timing of the Congo outbreak was likely an unfortunate coincidence, although it did not entirely discount a link with the outbreak currently raging in West Africa that has already killed at least 1,427 people. Currency markets, the euro when I checked last was 131.59. It broke down to a new 11-month low of 131.54 in Asia. And September 6 last year's low was 131.04. We're going down there. Dollar index 82.65. It's the highest in 13 months. Printed 82.698. I think corrections will continue to be shallow as we continue higher towards the 84.50 range. Japanese yen 103.98. Swissy 0.9178. Pound 165.52. Aussie 0.9315. India rupee 60.47. South Korean won 10.1440. Rose 0.2%. And touched the highest since July 10 earlier in the session. Real 226.15, Egyptian pound 715.23, South African rand 1067.44. Dollar index, I think we've finally got liftoff, and I think it remains in buy on dips. And I wrote about it over the weekend when I said the dollar's been punching higher. If things tip big, the dollar might soar. Euro dollar 131.59. I think that's headed lower. Yields on 10-year German debt fell to a record closing low of 0.943%, and yields on 2-year paper have gone negative. S&P closed above 5,000. Snapchat apparently is near a round of funding at a valuation of $10 billion from investors. I knew it was worth a few billion when I noticed how many hours the teenagers were spending on the platform. Gold, last time I looked, 1283.75. Ukraine lifted it a little. I think we're still headed to 1240. Crude oil, I think, is actually a trading buy again, $93.87. It's been a sharp slide. I think it's overcooked. According to Reuters, after disaster-stricken Malaysian Airlines staff brace for job cuts. And then I saw this tweet from a fellow called Nick Tuzo. My Malaysian Airlines flight out of Australia to Asia today. Awesome service. I'll put up the photograph and you can see the problem. Sub-Saharan Africa, Djiboutian President Ismail Omar Guelleh was unharmed in a shooting at the Horn of Africa's country's main airport in the capital that left 3 people wounded. A young member of the Republican Guard is under arrest after the incident in which Guelleh's personal physician, Idris Abdigala, was shot twice in the chest, and a third bullet caused a small wound to his head. Of course, Djibouti holds the biggest US military base in Africa at Camp Lemonnier. US warned its citizens in June of the risk of travel to Djibouti because of potential terrorist threats. According to ABC News, a rebel commander who warned the UN not to fly over his territory shot down the UN helicopter that came down yesterday in South Sudan. South Sudanese rebel commander Peter Gadet had warned the UN last week not to fly over his territory. Gadet's forces shot down the helicopter with an RPG, said Wick. Interesting and memorable facts to help you sound very smart about Africa. This is from MNG Africa. South Africa has 71,000 dollar millionaires, 60% of the total number in sub-Saharan Africa. That is more than Saudi Arabia or the UAE. There's been a surge in millionaires since 1994. Nigeria has the world's second highest growth in new champagne consumption, trailing only France. Prices for champagne in Nigerian nightclubs can vary widely, with a bottle of Moët costing around $130, with bottles of Cristal can cost more than $900. By 2020, almost 10 million young Africans will be joining the labour market every year. Kinshasa is the second largest Francophone urban area in the world after Paris. Johannesburg is the world's largest city not situated on a river, lake or coastline apparently. Luanda is the world's third most populous Portuguese-speaking city, behind only Sao Paulo in Rio de Janeiro. Africa's 90 or so ports handle just about 6% of global traffic. The disease with the highest mortality rate in Africa untreated is African trypanosomiasis, also known as sleeping sickness. It kills 100% of those infected if it goes untreated. You are more likely to die before the age of 65 in rich Nigeria, Angola or South Africa than in poor South Sudan or Somalia. That's interesting. Slums are the new normal. Then talking about You can be rich bringing your village habits to the city. In Brazzaville, 80% of the urban demand for leafy vegetables is met by gardeners who farm 500 hectares of land in the city. 60% of Harare's residents grow their own food. It's counterintuitive, but child survival in Nairobi slums actually improves with larger household size. There are plenty of other reasons, but very, very interesting reading. South Africa's economy avoided its second recession in 5 years. GDP rose after contracting 0.6% in the first quarter, the Statistics Office said. Mining plunged an annualized 9.4% last quarter after contracting 25% in the previous 3 months. GDP last quarter was buoyed by a 2.9% expansion in government services, which contributes 14% to the economy. The rand, of course, has weakened 21% against the dollar since the start of last year. On that note, I'll put up a photograph of Johannesburg sunset that I took 144 days ago. And also, I wrote at that time, which was 7th April 2014, that Nigeria rebasing or not, South Africa plays a heavyweight role in sub-Saharan Africa. And I think its economy has stabilized, and I think we're trundling along at the bottom. I've also put up a photograph of Kyalami, where we drove some very fast cars one morning and had a great time. South African all shares up 11.831% so far this year. Interesting piece in Bloomberg, how brightest brain Kirkinis failed with his African bank. Leon Kirkinis, described as one of the sharpest minds in banking, changed South Africa by expanding credit to the poor. He also underestimated the risks, wrecked his company, rattled financial markets, and left many of his 3.2 million clients drowning in debt. Interesting story. Dollar rand, 1067.40. Egyptian pound, where it's been for a long time, 715. Egyptian stock market eased 0.47%, still up 37.99% this year, and at multi-year highs. The Nigerian all-share eased 0.25%, it's at 9-week lows, and is now marginally negative this year. Nigerian troops crossed into North Cameroon after Boko Haram attacks their base. Around 480 Nigerian troops crossed into Cameroon after Boko Haram militants operating along the border between the two nations attacked a military base and police station, authorities in Cameroon said on Tuesday. Nigeria's Defense Ministry spokesman Major General Chris Olukolade said the troops charged across the border in a tactical maneuver during a sustained battle with the militants. Ghana eased 0.05%, that's up 2.6% this year, but it's at 7-month lows. President Peter Mutharika has shot down a cabinet minister's request for a 600% salary hike to cover the high cost of living. He's saying all the right things, by the way. Mutharika finds it unethical to raise ministers' salaries when the cost of living is not only high for them, but for every Malawian, and it seems to be, putting forward an interesting message. The opportunities are there in Mozambique, Mr. Nyusi said. He's expected to be the new president of Mozambique. Mozambique is no longer a country to talk about, but it is a country you have to speak to. I'll put up a photograph of Maputo taken from the sea 815 days ago. Burundi has set up an investigation after a number of dead bodies wrapped in plastic were found floating in a lake on its border with Rwanda. Fishermen say there are reports of dozens of unidentified bodies being spotted in recent weeks in Lake Ruweru. It's not clear how they died. The regional authorities say their investigations indicate the victims were not from Burundi. Rwanda police say no one has been reported missing on the Rwandan side. The victims are not Burundian citizens because the bodies are coming from Akagera River flowing from Rwanda. The latest bodies, 5 wrapped within 2 plastic bags, were discovered on Sunday and Monday. M&G again, shocking abuse of Tanzanian albinos where their corpses sell for $75,000. Look at this photograph of President Uhuru Kenyatta greeting Raila Odinga at the funeral service of former cabinet minister Njoroge Mungai at the PCEA Church of the Torch in Kikuyu, Kiambu County on August 26. On the left is Mama Ngina Kenyatta, who in my opinion is really the First Lady. That's an interesting photograph, because as Roland Barthes, and I used to like reading Roland Barthes, he's well worth reading on photography. And he said, one of the marks of our world is perhaps this reversal. We live according to the generalized image repertoire. Consider the United States, where everything is transformed into images. Only images exist and are produced and are consumed. Jubilee Insurance reported first half profit after tax increased 35.6%, gross premium up 28.5%. First half management expenses, however, surged 32.152%, profit before tax up 34.9%, profit after tax up 35.6%, interim dividend token a shilling, trades on a trailing PE of 10.579, and really is a cheap share when you consider the strength of its balance sheet and the discount versus some of its other peers. They said, interestingly, that the insurance business in Tanzania grew by 96%, Burundi 34%, Jubilee Mauritius was up by 31%, and Jubilee Uganda recorded 29% growth. Strong first half earnings. Jubilee is a strong franchise and it's an inexpensive share compared to its peers. Liberty Kenya reported first half profit accelerated 21.862%, total assets up 9%, profit before income tax up 16.859%. Interestingly, this is on an even lower PE of 8.14, and I think that's good value in point of fact. Strong results, I thought, and an attractively priced share. Crown Paints reported first half profit after tax was up 29.073%, revenue up 16.29%, profit after tax up 29.073%. The board has a positive outlook for the second half of the year given the current state of the construction industry. Positive signal, strong solid numbers, attractive low base effect. Kenya shilling improved last trading when I checked at 83.42. Central Bank of Kenya came into the market on Tuesday, lifting the shilling from its lowest level since December 2011. The Nairobi All Share is up 15.01% this year and has closed at a record high every session this week. NSE 20, 2.395% better this year, closed above 5,000 every session since the 5th of August. Joshua, at his presentation at the Safaricom Power Hour, said that he and Lamine is, we'll go and have lunch with in a moment, is the CEO of Standard Chartered Bank, believe interest rates are coming lower. I think that's correct. I'll put up a photograph, a panoramic photograph I took at that session last night. Diamond Trust is talking of entering Madagascar, the DRC, or South Sudan by 2017. Diamond Trust has rallied sharply this year, and the new shares are now trading at the market. I'll put up a link for their share price. Kenya Reinsurance has bought 10 shares worth about $1 million in the African Trade Insurance Agency as the two roll out plans to play bigger roles in insuring investments on the continent. Once again, thank you for stopping by. I do appreciate it.